Hello, this is Hara Zeiler, and this is my seventh installment for History 701, Dr. Carey Roberts, and I'm flushing out more of my dissertation topic, trying to find other viewpoints and articles that will help me to build a bigger background and support a possible dissertation on the foundations of ideology and history for the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms. I found three different sources this week, all of which unfortunately purvey a liberal mindset. The first one is published by Michigan State University called The Armed Victims, the Ego Function of Second Amendment Rhetoric, in Rhetoric and Public Affairs, Volume 18, number 2, Summer 2015. This article is by Brett Lunsford, who is an independent scholar in San Jose, California. And of these three articles, this one seems to be the most liberal. In it, he discusses how natural rights are never really ever settled. He even asks the question, are rights ever really settled? And therefore he thinks that rights should evolve and change to fit the times. Of course, the Second Amendment being limited to decreased capacity of rounds, comparing it to the First Amendment being limited because you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, I guess unless there is a fire. And he even goes on to say that people who are advocates of open carry, meaning that you can carry your firearm in a holster exposed so everyone can see it and it's not concealed, he says those people only want to carry to stir up controversy and are unconcerned about public safety. That has not been my personal experience, but that is what Brett Lunsford thinks. I'm going to move on. Laura J. Collins, also published by the Michigan State University Rhetoric and Public Affairs. This one is in volume 17, number 4, in the winter of 2014. And she writes, the Second Amendment is demanding subject, figuring the marginalized subject in demands for an unbridled Second Amendment. And she thinks that the NRA, the National Rifle Association, who favored the 1939 National Firearms Act, was more of a sportsman-oriented group. They supported the idea that shotguns should not be sawed off because no sportsman would need to do that, not realizing that manufacturers would make them that way in the first place, and that the NFA also limited many other kinds of firearms. She supports this by saying that the right to bear arms is a natural group right to a militia and not an individual right to own whatever weapon you want. That's a common liberal perspective. One interesting part is that she goes on to talk about the Second Amendment as a subject, talking about both sides, pro and anti-gun folks, boycotting Starbucks because they were trying to change their policy. And personally, she says that it was okay for people to boycott because they wanted to change the policy of Starbucks. But me personally, I don't think that that was really necessary, and that when people start boycotting businesses based on policies that aren't immoral, say like segregation in the South during the civil rights movement, but are just policies about constitutional amendments, then we run into some issues. Looking at Chick-fil-A, for example, and their stance on Christian rights, and they don't discriminate, but people are boycotting. And every time they get boycotted, they make even more money. The last article was published by Penn State University Press by David Randall, also in Philosophy and Rhetoric. This one's called The Rhetoric of Violence, the Public Sphere, and the Second Amendment. And it's interesting. Actually, I enjoyed this one the most because it went into the ideological backgrounds. He goes into the philosophers, Hobbes, Locke, Sidney, and then into some of the founders like Madison, Jefferson, and some of their letters discussing the need to bear arms, the rights of a militia, the rights of a free people to defend themselves against perhaps tyrannical government. And I was really impressed with this article all the way to the end. And when Mr. Randall concludes that the Second Amendment is a right to rebellion and therefore not really a right to own guns, which I don't understand. He never explains where he gets to that jump of logic. But he said, not to mention that if it's illegal to own weapons, having the right to own a weapon that isn't available or isn't legal is kind of a moot point. So my conclusion from these three articles and others that I found that I didn't cite here are that there are many liberal viewpoints that lead to biased conclusions, tainted research, and I think there is definitely some need for research to be done in this arena. Thank you very much.